লিভার ডিজিজ সম্পর্কে কোনো আইডিয়া কারোর? লিভার ডিজিজ বললেই ফার্স্ট সিরোসিস মনে আসে, তাই তো? তার মানে সিরোসিসের ব্যাপারে অনেকেই এখানে জানে, ধরে নিচ্ছি। তাহলে আমি সিরোসিস থেকে কোয়েশ্চেন করবো। সিরোসিসের টপিক আমরা সিরোসিস নিয়েও আজকে ডিসকাস করব। ওকে, তো সিরোসিস ইজ a cause of liver failure. It is a leading cause of chronic liver failure. But there is difference between chronic liver failure and cirrhosis. We will come to that discussion. Today, objective of our discussion is definition of liver failure, acute liver failure, chronic liver failure versus cirrhosis, portal hypertension, the pulmonary complications of liver failure, and portal hypertension and acute and chronic liver failure. What is liver failure? It is the most severe form of liver disease which may be acute, that is sudden onset with massive hepatocellular destruction, and more commonly liver failure is chronic, which happens over years insidiously due to progressive liver injury. So in some cases, individuals with a chronic liver failure will develop acute and chronic liver failure in which an unrelated acute injury is superimposed on a late stage chronic disease. So there is a flare of the chronic disease that leads to liver decompensation. So 80 to 90% of functional capacity of liver has to be lost before we can call it liver failure. When the liver can no longer maintain homeostasis, and liver transplantation is the best way of management. So if liver transplantation is not possible, it will lead to mortality in 80% of the cases. Okay, so first we come to acute liver failure. It is defined as an acute liver illness associated with hepatic encephalopathy and coagulopathy that occurs within 26 weeks. So this is important. So this time frame is very important. So it occurs within 26 weeks of the initial liver injury in the absence of pre-existing liver disease. Usually, the syndrome manifests within 8 weeks of injury, and many patients progress to coma within only a week. So acute যেটা হচ্ছে যে কোনো একটা ডিজিজ হওয়ার 8 weeks এর মধ্যেই this will lead to liver failure. যেটা ক্রনিকের সাথে ডিফারেন্স হচ্ছে, ক্রনিক হতে অনেকটা টাইম লাগছে, কিন্তু অ্যাকিউটে সেই টাইমটা লাগবে না। সো উইদিন দিস 26 week window, it is useful to know the interval between the onset of symptom of liver failure, since this can provide us with helpful clues. So very rapid onset liver failure is most often induced by drugs or toxins and is typically the result of massive hepatic necrosis. This form of liver failure has been referred to as fulminant liver failure. We will come to this term later in our discussion. In Asia, acute hepatitis B and E are the predominant causes of acute liver failure. In India in particular, hepatitis B is the most common cause, and this is a very important point for MCQ as well. So with acetaminophen or paracetamol toxicity, which is the most important cause of liver failure in US, it is not the most common cause in India, but it is most common cause in US. So with that, the liver failure will occur within 1 week of onset of symptoms. So here, this liver failure will be extremely rapid. But in case of hepatitis, liver failure will take longer time to develop. So what is the morphology? We will see that this acute liver failure is associated with massive hepatic necrosis with broad regions of parenchymal loss surrounding islands of preserved or viable or regenerating hepatocytes. So the affected liver is small and shrunken. The prominence of hepatocellular dropout and of ductular reactions in these livers depend on the nature or the duration of the insult. Toxic injuries such as acetaminophen overdoses, paracetamol overdose, usually take place within hours to days. So this will lead to scar formation and regeneration. Acute viral infections may cause failure over weeks to few months, so that although hepatocyte injury continues to outpace the repair, so injury is happening alongside the repair. So regeneration is often evident along with scarring in case of viral infection, because it is taking a longer time to develop. Okay, so this picture shows us the morphology. So this is the gross of a liver which has undergone massive necrosis. So here we can see the liver it is smaller than usual size, shrunken, and we can also see that it is bile stained and congested. Now on microscopy we can see hepatocellular necrosis is being seen, and this is a typical case of paracetamol overdose. So confluent necrosis is seen. Okay, what is the picture? What is the picture with A? What is the picture? What does it signify? The microscopy shows picture of massive necrosis. So this is the cut section of a liver, and here we can see that this is necrosis. Now why I am again and again saying that this is necrosis? Because this is okay. So what you all can see that this is some pink acellular amorphous material. So these are, the color is pink. We can't see the cells, the cell outline or the nucleus, nothing can be seen from here. So this is the typical picture of a necrosis. So in necrosis we will not be able to see the nucleus, we will only see some pink amorphous material. That's how a necrosis looks in microscopy. Okay, so surrounding that there is residual normal tissue. Okay, now just describing that in a little bit more detail. So it is associated with widespread dysfunction of liver cells without obvious cell death, such as in diffuse microvesicular steatosis, which is related to fatty liver of pregnancy, or in idiosyncratic reactions to toxins like valproate or tetracyclines. So in these settings, the hepatocyte metabolism is severely affected, and this is usually due to the mitochondrial dysfunction. So that is a very important cause. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a very important cause of this liver cell death, and this prevents them from carrying out their normal function. So in states of immunodeficiency, common example of which is HIV infection. So this can be also due to post-transplantation immunosuppression and certain lymphoid malignancies. There is presence of certain viral infections, particularly cytomegalovirus, HSV or herpes simplex virus, adenovirus, and these viruses can cause acute liver failure in immunocompromised patients. So as the treatment of HIV and other diseases they are improving, these forms of viral hepatitis are getting lower in number. So the clinical features, as you all know, I guess, that nausea, vomiting, jaundice, these are the most important three clinical features of acute liver failure, and this will be followed by encephalopathy, hepatic encephalopathy, which is a life-threatening condition, and also coagulation defects. So typically the serum liver transaminases are markedly elevated. So what are the transaminases? What are the most commonly done transaminase tests in case of liver injury? Can anyone name? ACPT and ACPT, SCOT. Anything else? Anything else that we do in liver function test? ALP, right? Alkaline phosphatase. Anything other than that? We can also perform GGT, that is gamma-globulin transferase. So the liver is initially enlarged due to hepatocyte swelling, inflammatory infiltrates, edema. So initially there will be enlargement due to edema, and after that when the liver cells are dying, when there is death of the liver parenchyma, the liver will shrink. Okay, so in case of acute liver disease, first there will be a rise in all these liver enzymes, SGOT, SGPT, but it will be followed by a decline in these serum transaminases. But this is not a sign of improvement. So if a hepatitis patient or an acute liver failure patient is coming to you, you are looking at his liver function test. First you are seeing, okay, the enzymes levels are high, so the liver is in a very poor condition, and once the treatment has started, now you are seeing that the enzyme levels are coming down, but you cannot decide that the patient is improving, okay, because often this is a sign of deterioration as the hepatocytes are dying. So when the enzyme levels are coming down, it is rather an indication that there is few viable hepatocytes left. The suspicion is confirmed if there is clinically the patient is worsening, like there is worsening jaundice, worsening coagulation tests results, and there is also onset of encephalopathy. So with unabated progression, multi-organ system failure can occur, and if transplantation is not done, death will occur. So we will just discuss few points about the clinical features. So jaundice or cholestasis, it is occurring due to the alteration of bile formation and flow, leading to retention of bilirubin and solutes that is normally eliminated through the bile. Yellow discoloration of the skin and sclera, that is jaundice or icterus, they can occur respectively, and with bilirubin retention, there is increased risk of potentially life-threatening bacterial infection. Now coming to hepatic encephalopathy, it is a spectrum of disturbance in consciousness ranging from subtle behavioral abnormalities to marked confusion, stupor, deep coma, and death. Encephalopathy may progress over days, weeks, or months following acute liver injury. Associated fluctuating neurological signs include rigidity and hyperreflexia. Asterixis. Okay, asterixis is a type of tremor, and it is a characteristic sign manifested as a non-rhythmic rapid extension flexion movement of head and the extremities, best seen when the arms are held in extension with dorsiflexed wrists. Okay, the hepatic encephalopathy is believed to be caused by elevated ammonia levels. So whenever liver failure is happening, the ammonia level increases due to the compromised metabolic cycles that occur inside the liver, because liver is the largest metabolic site of metabolism in our body. So this will correlate with impaired neural function and cerebral edema. So the principal source of ammonia in this case is gastrointestinal tract, where the microorganisms are producing this ammonia, and also by the intestinal enterocytes, the lining cells of the gut, during the glutamine metabolism. So normally this ammonia is transported in the portal vein to the liver, where it is metabolized in the urea cycle. But since liver is failing, urea cycle is not happening properly, so this detoxification mechanism is failing. Now coming to coagulopathy. So we all know that hepatocytes are responsible for synthesis of clotting factors that are factor 2, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11 and 12, as well as fibrinogen. So with liver failure, factor deficiency will happen that will lead to coagulopathy. So normally clinically there will be easy bruisability, and it can progress to life-threatening or fatal intracranial bleeding. So it is, since liver is also responsible for removing certain activated coagulation factors from the circulation. So this damage in the liver cells will also lead to disseminated intravascular coagulation, where the coagulation factors are all getting consumed, and this will lead to a vicious cycle. Okay, now coming to portal hypertension, this arises when there is diminished flow through the portal venous system. Now this may occur because of obstruction at 3 stages, that is prehepatic, hepatic and posthepatic. Now I assume that you all know the circulation of liver. So what are the blood vessels that are supplying the liver? What are the blood vessels? Portal vein and central vein, hepatic artery. So yes, so which is bringing the oxygenated blood? অক্সিজেনেটেড ব্লাডটা কোন আর্টারি দিয়ে আসছে? হেপাটিক আর্টারি দিয়ে। তাহলে পোর্টাল ভেনের ফাংশনটা কি? ডিঅক্সিজেনেটেড ব্লাড, কিন্তু যা নিউট্রিয়েন্টস যেটা ইন্টেস্টাইন থেকে যেটা অ্যাবজর্বড হচ্ছে, অল দ্য নিউট্রিয়েন্টস, সেটা কিন্তু পোর্টাল ভেন দিয়েই আসছে। তো whenever there is any obstruction in the portal venous system, this blood is not coming, so there is congestion. So it can also occur in acute liver failure, but it is more commonly seen in chronic liver failure associated with cirrhosis, and we will describe it later. In acute liver failure, this portal hypertension will develop within days to weeks, and mainly the cause will be intrahepatic. And in chronic liver disease, this portal hypertension will develop in months to years, and the effects are more complex. Okay, so another syndrome that we see here is hepatorenal syndrome. We will discuss portal hypertension in detail in our later slides. It is a form of renal failure occurring in individuals with liver failure in whom there is no intrinsic morphologic or functional cause of kidney dysfunction. So the name is hepatorenal syndrome. So basically the renal problems or the renal defects are caused by the liver dysfunction. There is no primary renal disease. Okay, that is why it is called hepatorenal syndrome. So this onset will be marked by a drop in urine output and increased level of urea and creatinine in blood. Its pathophysiology is not completely understood, but the triggering event is thought to be portal hypertension and secondary increased production of vasodilators such as nitric oxide by the endothelial cells that line the splanchnic vasculature. Okay, so this will in turn lead to systemic, this nitric oxide will also lead to systemic vasodilation, diminished renal perfusion. In the setting of portal hypertension and persistent vasodilator production, the principal effect of renin-angiotensin activation is to further diminish the renal perfusion and the GFR, leading to renal failure. So it will again lead to a vicious cycle. So the decline in renal function is reversible if the liver function is restored. So here, how can we improve the kidney function? Only by improving the improving the liver function, only by treating the liver disease. So that can be done by liver transplantation. Patients who develop the hepatorenal syndrome usually have portal hypertension due to cirrhosis, severe alcoholic hepatitis, and less often due to some metastatic tumor in the liver. Okay, so now coming to the portal hypertension and cirrhosis. So liver failure in chronic liver disease, it is most commonly associated with advanced fibrosis or cirrhosis, a condition marked by diffuse remodeling of liver into parenchymal nodules. These are often regenerative nodules and surrounded by fibrous bands and variable degree of vascular, that is portosystemic shunting. I will show you the gross and microscopic picture. So the leading cause of chronic liver failure worldwide are chronic hepatitis B, chronic hepatitis C, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and alcoholic liver disease. So in case of US, there are the most common cause, chronic liver disease is the most common cause of mortality. That is not very important. So you have to mainly remember the common causes in India. Now, what is the difference between cirrhosis and chronic liver failure? Are they same or are they different? Can we use the term can we literally exchange the terms? মানে সবসময় কি সিরোসিস হলেই ক্রনিক লিভার ফেলিয়ার হবে, বা যদি সবসময় ক্রনিক লিভার ফেলিয়ার হয় তাতে সিরোসিসই হতে হবে, নাকি অন্য কোনো কজও হতে পারে? ক্রনিক লিভার অন্য কোনো কজও হতে পারে। এক্স্যাক্টলি। সো these two conditions are often associated, but they are not synonymous. So not all cirrhosis will lead to liver failure, and not all liver failure is caused by cirrhosis. So for example, chronic diseases such as primary biliary cholangitis, primary sclerosing cholangitis, nodular regenerative hyperplasia, chronic schistosomiasis, and fibropolycystic liver disease are they are not fully established cirrhosis at the end, but they will lead to chronic liver failure. So when it comes to the causes of chronic liver failure, you have to remember all these entities. Not just cirrhosis, but all these entities will lead to chronic liver failure. And on the other hand, patients with well-treated autoimmune hepatitis or those with suppressed hepatitis B infection, they will not progress to end-stage liver disease, that is liver failure, though they will present as cirrhosis. So if there is untreated viral hepatitis, alcoholic liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and metabolic disease, here we will see some distinctive features in morphology. So the term cirrhosis implies the presence of severe chronic disease, and it is not a specific diagnosis. Okay, so there is another term called cryptogenic cirrhosis. So here cirrhosis will be there, but a clear cause will not be visible. So the clinical features are 40% of the patients will be asymptomatic and until they reach the advanced stage. The rest of them will have symptoms like anorexia, weight loss, weakness, and in advanced stage there will be signs of liver failure like the hepatic encephalopathy, like portal hypertension and the other signs. Okay, so in case of cirrhosis, the most common causes of death are hepatic encephalopathy, bleeding from esophageal varices, bacterial infections, and also the hepatocellular carcinoma. So cirrhosis can also lead to hepatocellular carcinoma. So basically, just as I discussed earlier, there is presence of parenchymal nodules surrounded by dense bands of fibrosis throughout the liver. So it will convert the liver into a normally, which is normally having a smooth capsule. Now this liver will have a bumpy surface with depressed areas of scarring and bulging regenerative nodules. So as you can see, this surface is very irregular nodular, and these depressed areas are scars. These are the areas of fibrosis or scarring, and the intervening areas of bulging, these are the regenerative nodules. Here the regenerating hepatocytes are present. Okay, and since not all end-stage liver disorders are cirrhotic, they will have variable degree of injury and repair. So a spectrum of changes will be seen. Okay, now coming to the microscopy, we can see the highlight the microscopic features by using special stains for collagen. So a question for you: what is a special stain for collagen? What special stain do we use here? From this side, কোলাজেনের জন্য কোনো স্পেশাল স্টেন আমরা ইউজ করি? খুব কমনলি ইউজ করা হয়। স্টার্টস উইথ এম, ইনিশিয়াল, MT stain, Mason's trichrome. Ever heard of this name? So the size of the nodules, the pattern of the scarring, the portal tracts, the linking portal tracts to each other versus linking portal tracts to the central veins. Basically, so here is the picture. So here, this is the bands of scarring. Okay, the thick bands of collagen. These are also the bands of collagen. So they are basically connecting the portal triads with each other and also connecting the portal triads with the central vein. And the degree of parenchymal collapse and the extent of vascular thrombosis all vary from disease to disease. Okay, now, so what are the additional features of chronic liver failure? So other than whatever we described earlier, like jaundice, hepatic encephalopathy, the other features can be there, like persistent cholestasis can lead to severe pruritus, and this can only be relieved by liver transplantation. And there will also be impaired estrogen metabolism, as all the steroid hormones are being metabolized in liver. So when liver failure is there, there will be failure of steroid hormone metabolism, and impaired estrogen metabolism will lead to hyperestrogenemia, which will produce vascular changes. Estrogen causes vasodilation. So this vasodilation will lead to Palmer erythema, and also the spider nevi or the spider angioma of the skin. So this angioma has a central arteriole, central pulsating dilated arteriole, from which there will be branching small vessels. And also in males, this hyperestrogenemia will produce hypogonadism and gynecomastia. Hypogonadism can also occur in women due to disruption of hypothalamic pituitary axis function, either through nutritional deficiency associated with the chronic liver failure or due to primary hormonal alterations. So now coming to portal hypertension in detail, as we discussed earlier, that we can divide the causes of portal hypertension into prehepatic, hepatic and posthepatic. Now the major prehepatic conditions are obstructive thrombosis, narrowing of the portal vein, before it enters the liver, and massive splenomegaly with increased splenic vein flow. And the main post-hepatic conditions are severe right-sided heart failure, congestive heart failure, constrictive pericarditis, and hepatic vein outflow obstruction. Can you say the name of the syndrome where hepatic vein outflow obstruction we can see? It's a condition. Have you ever heard of Budd-Chiari syndrome? Yes. So there we will see hepatic vein outflow obstruction. A dominant intrahepatic cause is cirrhosis, as we all described. There will be fibrosis. So in case of cirrhosis, it will lead to portal hypertension, and the less frequent intrahepatic causes are schistosomiasis, massive fatty change, diffuse fibrous granulomatous disease such as sarcoidosis. Okay, so this is a table where I already discussed the prehepatic causes. The intrahepatic causes: cirrhosis, then nodular degenerative hyperplasia, primary biliary cholangitis, schistosomiasis, diffuse fibrosing granulomatous disease like sarcoidosis, infiltrative, any malignancy in liver, all the intestinal malignancies, the malignancies of small and large intestine, they very commonly metastasize to the liver. So this will also be a cause, and then amyloidosis can also be a cause. The post-hepatic causes are severe right-sided heart failure, constrictive pericarditis, and hepatic vein outflow obstruction. So what are the consequences? Main consequences are hepatic encephalopathy, ascites, formation of portosystemic shunts, and congestive splenomegaly. So here the picture, we can see all the outcomes of portal hypertension. So in brain, we will see hepatic encephalopathy. These are the locations of the portosystemic shunts. So this is one location on the skin, on the chest, where we can see the spider angioma. On the skin of the abdomen, anterior abdominal wall, around the umbilicus, there will be periumbilical opening of portosystemic shunts leading to caput medusae. Medusa head appearance will be there. Okay, so in esophagus, in the esophagogastric junction, there will be esophageal varices, which once they rupture will lead to fatal bleeding. Okay, and then there can be splenomegaly. There can also be hemorrhoid and testicular atrophy. Now coming to ascites, so my last class was on body fluid. So there I already talked about the peritoneal fluid and the type of peritoneal fluid and ascites that we will see in case of liver failure. So in the peritoneal, the accumulation of peritoneal fluid, that is ascites, it is most commonly caused by cirrhosis in case of 85% of cases, and it becomes clinically detectable when there is at least 500 ml of fluid. And as I discussed in my last class, this fluid, since this is transudative in nature, will have less than 3 gram per dl of protein and SAG gradient of more than equal to 1.1 gram per dl. The fluid may contain scant number of mesothelial cells and some lymphocytes. Presence of neutrophils will suggest secondary bacterial infection and peritonitis. It can also suggest some disseminated intra-abdominal cancer. With long-standing ascites, this peritoneal fluid will seep through the transdiaphragmatic lymphatics, and they can also produce hydrothorax, particularly on the right side. The pathogenesis of ascites is complex, involving sinusoidal hypertension, hypoalbuminemia, and increased hepatic lymph flow, Plancke's vasodilation, and hyperdynamic circulation. So the main causes are sinusoidal hypertension and hypoalbuminemia. Since liver is failing, protein synthesis is not happening, there will be decreased albumin. This will lead to decreased colloid oncotic pressure and will lead to transudative edema. So the portosystemic shunts, vascular dilatation and remodeling often leads to development of thin-walled venous shunts between the portal systemic circulation that will bypass the liver. These shunts may appear where systemic and portal circulations share the capillary bed. So I already showed you in the picture the commonest site of the portosystemic shunts. So there are veins around and within the rectum, so they will manifest as hemorrhoids. The veins around the esophagogastric junction will produce varices, and in the retroperitoneum, in the falciform ligament of liver, we will also see opening of these shunts. The veins around the abdominal wall will appear as dilated subcutaneous veins extending from the umbilicus towards the deep margin, and they will have this caput medusa or medusa head appearance, and hemorrhoidal bleeding may occur, but hemorrhoidal bleeding will rarely lead to death. What is more important is the esophagogastric varices, because this variceal bleeding can appear in 40% of individuals with cirrhosis, and if untreated will lead to mortality or death in 30% of these patients. Okay, then we can see splenomegaly. So here spleen will be hugely enlarged, often assuming the weight of 1 kg or 1000 gram. That is 5 to 6 times the normal, but it may not necessarily correlate with the features of portal hypertension. Splenomegaly may secondarily induce hematologic abnormalities attributable to hypersplenism. So once massive splenomegaly is there, it will lead to hypersplenism, and in case of hypersplenism, the hypersplenism will present with thrombocytopenia, even pancytopenia, and in this case the only therapy will be to remove the spleen, because the spleen is sequestering all the blood elements. Okay, again the picture to summarize whatever I told you already. One important question for clinical point of view, as I told you that we may need to remove spleen as a therapeutic measure of hypersplenism. So what step we have to take before removing this spleen? What treatment has to be given to the patient before one can remove the spleen? There are some mandatory treatment that has to be given, some mandatory vaccines that has to be given to a patient before. Just go and read. This is a very important question. Okay, you can get it in internet as well. So we'll briefly discuss the pulmonary complications of liver failure. So two pulmonary syndromes can occur in the setting of chronic liver failure. One is hepatopulmonary syndrome and one is portopulmonary hypertension. So hepatopulmonary syndrome is seen in 30% cases with liver and failure and portal hypertension, and it is caused by dilatation of intrapulmonary capillary and precapillary vessels up to 500 micrometer in size. Right to left shunting of blood through the dilated vessels produce ventilation perfusion mismatch and impairs oxygenation of blood, which manifests as hypoxemia. The resultant dyspnea is worse in the upright position rather than in the recumbent position, and the gravity, this basically exhibits the ventilation perfusion mismatch. Patients with this syndrome have a poorer prognosis than patients without this syndrome, and pathogenesis is not that much clear, but it is related to factors such as endothelin 1, which will stimulate the endothelial cells to produce vasodilators such as nitric oxide. The portopulmonary hypertension, it refers to the pulmonary arterial hypertension which is caused due to liver disease. It seems to depend on concomitant portal hypertension and excessive pulmonary vasoconstriction and vascular remodeling. So whenever there is pulmonary vasoconstriction, there will be pulmonary hypertension, but since it is caused by portal hypertension, this is called portopulmonary hypertension. The most common clinical manifestations are dyspnea on exertion and clubbing of the fingers. Now, last point of our discussion is acute and chronic liver failure. So a patient who has liver failure but chronic liver failure and is stable suddenly develops signs of acute liver failure. This is called acute and chronic. So in these cases, there is often a background of cirrhosis and extensive vascular shunting. So here, large volumes of liver parenchyma is having a borderline vascular supply, leaving them highly vulnerable to the threats. So the supply of oxygen or the blood is already low. If there is any threat that comes on top of that, it will immediately damage the cells. So here we see short-term mortality of patients in 50% of cases. Now, patient with chronic hepatitis B infection who becomes super infected with hepatitis D may suddenly get decompensated, as may patients with medically suppressed hepatitis B infection in whom viral mutants are arising. So, ascending cholangitis in a patient with primary sclerosing cholangitis can also be a cause of rapid decompensation.